My name is Miguel. I live in the United States, but I have always been fascinated by macabre stories and real cases that defy any logical explanation. During a visit from my friend Rick to Brazil, he heard chilling accounts of murders that happened in Rio de Janeiro, cases that mark the city and remain alive in the memory of those who witnessed them. Rick came back with stories that kept me awake for nights, and now I share with you the 5 most terrifying accounts. The year was 2011. The early morning was silent in downtown Rio de Janeiro, but in the building number 145 on Rua Frei Caneca, a horrible crime was unfolding in the shadows. The body of Mario, an influential businessman, was found inside his luxurious apartment, in a scene that seemed straight out of a horror movie. When the police broke down the door, drawn by the strong smell of decomposition, they were met with a terrifying sight. Mario's body was lying on his own bed, completely naked, with his wrists and ankles tightly bound by electrical wires. His face was contorted in a mix of pain and horror, his eyes wide open, as if his last vision had been of something indescribably macabre. But what shocked the investigators the most were the cuts. These weren't random wounds. They were precise, surgical incisions spread across his body, forming geometric patterns. Some appeared superficial, made only to provoke pain, while others were deep enough to cause heavy bleeding. One of the most frightening cuts started at the corner of his mouth and went up to his ear, creating a twisted, macabre smile on his lifeless face. On the bedroom mirror, a phrase written in blood sent chills down their spines. He deserved it. The smell of iron in the air and the sticky, dried liquid on the glass made the scene even more disturbing. But who could commit such a brutal crime and still have the coldness to leave such a direct message? The police began their investigation and soon discovered that Mario wasn't just a successful businessman. He was involved in a complex corruption scheme, embezzling millions of reais through fraudulent contracts. Reports indicated that he had been threatened several times, both by betrayed former partners and figures from organized crime who felt cheated. But there was something even stranger. The apartment showed no signs of forced entry. This indicated that the killer might have been someone Mario knew and let in without resistance. Or worse, someone who was already hiding inside the apartment when he arrived. Forensics suggested that the torture could have lasted for hours. The killer seemed to want Mario to feel every blow, every cut, every moment of suffering. This wasn't just a simple murder. It was a planned, sadistic execution. The investigation dragged on for months, but no arrests were made. There were no fingerprints at the scene, no security camera footage showing the entry or exit of suspects. The case was closed as just another unsolved crime in Rio de Janeiro, but the residents of the building began reporting strange occurrences after that day. Muffled screams were heard during the night, as if the scene was repeating itself in a supernatural way. Some claimed to feel chills as they passed by the abandoned apartment. Others swore they saw shadows moving inside, even though they knew no one lived there anymore. To this day, the door of apartment 701 remains locked, and those who dared to press their ear against the dark wood say that if they listen closely enough, they can still hear whispers, crying out for justice. In May 2021, Rio de Janeiro became the stage for one of the bloodiest police operations in history. The Jacarezinho favela turned into a battlefield, where 28 people lost their lives in a brutal confrontation between heavily armed officers and suspected criminals. The operation, officially aimed at dismantling drug trafficking in the area, quickly escalated into a massacre that left deep scars on the community. Residents recall waking up to the deafening sound of gunfire echoing through the narrow alleys. Helicopters hovered above, while BOP officers and civil police units stormed the favela. Weapons drawn, moving like a military force in enemy territory. Witnesses described scenes of horror. Men begging for their lives, homes invaded without warrants, and bodies dragged through the streets like trophies of war. Among the victims was Joãozinho, a 22-year-old known in the community for fixing motorcycles. His family insists he had no involvement with crime, but he was shot at point-blank range inside his home. Dona Vera, an elderly woman who had lived in Jacarezinho for over 50 years, said she saw police executing young men after they had surrendered. They didn't give them a chance. They shot to kill, she recounted, her voice trembling. The operation, later justified by authorities as a necessary action against organized crime, left a trail of unanswered questions. Video footage and reports from human rights organizations suggest that several victims were executed rather than killed in combat. One of the most chilling images captured by residents shows a blood-soaked alley where bodies were lined up, some with gunshots to the head, an indication of extrajudicial killings. The massacre triggered protests across Rio, with activists demanding justice. "They call us criminals, but who protects us from them?" shouted Beto, a local organizer during a demonstration in downtown Rio. The case reached the Supreme Court, but to this day, no officer has been convicted or even formally charged. What haunts Jacarezinho most is not just the memory of that day, but the feeling that it never really ended. Locals swear they still hear the echoes of that morning, the distant gunfire, the desperate cries, the last breaths of those who fell. It's as if the tragedy is trapped in the walls of the favela, refusing to be forgotten. In the 90s, fear spread through the upscale neighborhood of Barra da Tijuca. A serial killer was on the loose, and his crimes followed a chilling pattern. Men were found dead in motel rooms, always in the same way, strangled with shoelaces, their wrists tied behind their backs. There were no signs of forced entry, no struggle, no witnesses. It was as if the victims had willingly walked into their deaths. The media dubbed him O Estrangulador de Barra, and his choice of victims seemed deliberate. Single, well-dressed men who had gone out alone for the night. Businessmen, professionals, men who wouldn't be missed right away. Some were last seen at trendy bars in Copacabana or Ipanema before mysteriously disappearing, only to be found lifeless the next morning in discreet motels along the coast. The police worked on multiple theories. Was it a crime of passion? A serial killer with a twisted ritual? A hitman disguising executions as random murders? Some officers believed the killer knew his victims personally, while others were convinced he was a predator who hunted them in bars and clubs. One of the most infamous cases was that of Mauricio, a 38-year-old lawyer who was last seen leaving a high-end restaurant near Avenida Olegario Maciel. Security cameras caught him entering a motel with an unidentified man. Hours later, a cleaner found his body, shoelaces tied around his neck, wrists bound, no signs of robbery. The man he was with was never identified. The murders continued for years, but then, without warning, they stopped. Or at least, that's what the police thought. Some believed the killer didn't stop. He just adapted. Reports of similar crimes surfaced over the years, but with slight variations. Different knots, different methods of restraint, perhaps even different locations. The official investigation was eventually closed, but whispers never faded. To this day, some residents of Barra da Tijuca believe the estrangulador is still out there. Maybe he got older, more careful, more selective. Maybe he changed his hunting grounds. But one question remains: could he still be waiting for his next victim? In the 1980s, the disappearance of a 7-year-old girl shook the north zone of Rio de Janeiro. One afternoon, she was playing near her home, just a few blocks from a busy avenue, when she vanished without a trace. Her family searched desperately. Neighbors organized groups to comb the area, but there was no sign of the child. Days later, her body was found floating in a canal, her small figure adrift in the murky waters. There were no visible signs of violence, no bruises, no wounds. But what disturbed everyone the most was her face. Her eyes were wide open, frozen in an expression of pure terror, as if she had seen something beyond human comprehension in her final moments. The police investigated but found no concrete leads. There was no ransom demand, no known enemies of the family. The autopsy was inconclusive, listing the cause of death as undetermined. Rumors spread quickly. Some whispered about a dangerous predator on the loose, someone who knew how to leave no trace. Others believed in something darker, that she had been taken by a force beyond this world. Then, the sightings began. Residents claimed to see a little girl dressed in white, barefoot, wandering near the canal late at night. At first, they thought it was just a lost child, but when they approached, she would vanish into thin air. Taxi drivers reported stopping to help a girl standing alone by the roadside, only to watch in horror as she disappeared before their eyes. One of the most chilling encounters happened to Seu Jorge, a street vendor who worked near the canal. D swore that, one night, as he was closing up his stall, he heard a child's voice whispering his name. When he turned, he saw her, standing at the edge of the canal, her dress soaked, her hair dripping. She raised a small hand as if asking for help, but before he could move, she simply faded into the mist. The girl's story became legend, a ghostly presence lingering over the neighborhood. Some say she appears only to those who need to be warned, to those who, like her, are in danger. Others believe she is trapped between worlds, forever searching for justice that never came. To this day, those who walk near the canal at night swear they feel a chill in the air, as if unseen eyes are watching. And sometimes, just sometimes, they hear the faint, distant sound of a child's voice, calling for help from the darkness. In 2014, an ordinary morning at Rio de Janeiro's Central Station took a gruesome turn. Amid the usual rush of commuters and street vendors setting up their stalls, a janitor made a horrifying discovery: black garbage bags abandoned near a platform. At first, he thought they contained food waste or discarded clothes, but as he opened one, the stench hit him before his eyes could process the nightmare inside. A severed arm, pale and lifeless, lay twisted among the trash. The police were called immediately, and soon, more bags were found scattered around the station, near staircases, behind benches, even by the tracks. Inside them, human body parts, carefully wrapped, as if someone had deliberately placed them there to be found. The initial theory was that the remains belonged to multiple victims, a possible dumping ground for gang violence. But when forensic experts examined the remains, a chilling truth emerged. All the pieces belonged to a single person. Someone had taken the time to dismember the body with precision, separating each limb as if following an anatomical guide. Who was the victim? Who was the killer? The police had no answers. There were no missing person reports matching the body, no surveillance footage showing the bags being dropped off. The dismemberment was done with surgical skill. This was not the work of an amateur. Yet there was no sign of struggle, no evidence leading to a suspect. The station, with its constant flow of people, had swallowed the truth whole, leaving behind only fragments of horror. As time passed, the case faded into the long list of unsolved crimes in Rio de Janeiro. But for those who work at Central Station, the mystery never truly disappeared. Some employees claim that, at dusk, When the last rays of sunlight cast long shadows across the platforms, dark stains sometimes appear on the ground, stains that weren't there moments before. No matter how much they scrub, the marks seem to return, as if the past refuses to be erased. To this day, no one knows who left those body parts behind, or why. The only certainty is that somewhere in the city, a murderer walks free, their secret, hidden in the echoes of Central Station's endless, restless crowd. These are just some of the most shocking crimes that haunt Rio de Janeiro. My friend Rick heard them and told me in detail, and now they are here for you to know as well. True or not, one thing is certain. Some stories never die, crimes remain, unanswered, and mysteries may never be unraveled. Would you dare to walk alone through the streets where these crimes happened? If you enjoyed this video and want more chilling stories, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Share this video with someone who also loves a good mystery. See you next time, if you dare.